without further ado, I'd like to introduce now our first speaker. It's John Hilary, the Executive Director of War on Want, who's going to get us underway. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Patrick, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for coming out. It's fantastic to be standing here and to see such a completely packed room. And for those of you who are right at the back and want a seat, there is a couple more over here as well, and amongst in the middle as well. I'm really thrilled to have a whole day devoted to the issue of militarism, to the corporations expanding around the world, putting communities under stress, and the resistance that is being formed and fought across the world in resistance to the expansion of capital into their areas. And I'm really pleased that we've been able to do it here in Richmond, which is a fantastic venue, which we've used before. We've really enjoyed coming back here. Really brilliant to be here again. I want to shout out also a couple of thank yous to begin with. The first is the Emile Melbourne Trust, which has given us money to hold this event today, so we're really grateful to them. But also to all of my colleagues in War on Want who've put an enormous amount of effort into making this the really exciting day that we have planned for us today. Masses of culture, debate, these amazing testimonies from across the world. So I want you to just join with me in thanking them before we get going for everything they've done to make it. I'm really thrilled as well that we have a day focused on militarism, conflict and the resistance to it, because that's where War on Want started over 60 years ago. When Victor Gallant put the letter into The Guardian back in 1951, asking people to join a world movement against poverty, against injustice, he put that squarely in the context of the fight against militarism, because that was the time of the Korean War. Back in the early 1950s, a war which ended up with millions dead, an imperialist war fought miles and miles away. And it was a war which we still see the consequences of today. The consequences for the Korean people split north and south, and for the destabilization of that region. That's where War on Want started, in trying to say no to that war and giving a message of hope against violence, against war, and for peace based on justice. Understanding that you cannot have peace without justice, and justice is the central message of everything that we stand for. And that message against war and for justice cannot be more relevant than this year. This year we're seeing the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War. And the government in this country, David Cameron, is planning to celebrate that horror with national spirit. Michael Gove talking of the courage and the nobility of the British spirit in fighting that war. And they're planning to have 400 plus plaques around the country to celebrate the heroes of the war, the heroism involved in that horrible carnage. Not the devastation, not the horror, not the 16 million dead and the 20 million who are wounded. Not my own father, who grew up without ever knowing his dad because he had been killed as a result of the wounds he got in the First War. Or my father-in-law, who never knew his dad for exactly the same reason. An entire generation when we were growing up, who'd lost brothers, who'd lost fathers, uncles, all of the members of their family. And yet we're being told today that this is a cause for celebration, commemorating the nobility. And I'm really proud that War on Want is a signatory to the No Glory in War coalition, which says we will remember the horrors of war. We will remember the horrors of the First World War, and we will not celebrate and we will not commemorate the glory of it. But also, it's not just about bringing that recognition of the horrors of war. It's thinking why, the reasons, the causes of war. Not saying that this was some noble expedition of the British fighting back against the crazy Kaiser and German expansion, but seeing that this was a colonial war, an imperialist war, where European powers were carving up the world in their own interests and fighting against each other to have control over the world. That's what the First World War was about, and it was in that perverted cause that so many millions of people lost their lives. And that is exactly what we see today. The continuation of that imperialist expansion, the continuation of colonial, neo-colonial struggles across the world, where the Western powers try to take over all of the countries which are not theirs. And we at War on Want, we produced a report on the Afghan war, the Great Game. We called it the Great Game precisely because we wanted to remind people that's what it was called in the 19th century, where the British Empire and the Russian empires clashed over Afghanistan to control those important ways across Central Asia and into the Middle East. And exactly as well, it was not the noble causes which led us there, and it was not the noble causes that we were told about under the Blair government which took us into Iraq. It was for oil. We found out that it was for nothing more noble than getting control of that region's oil supplies and making sure that British, European, US, Western people could still enjoy that cheap and free access at the expense of other peoples around the world. But it's not just even that. It's not just even the expansion of capital and all of the horrors it brings in its wake. It's about militarism and war as a business. Because not everybody is made poorer from war. There are many companies which profit from war. You think of the arms companies selling weapons quite happily to both sides because they're always going to be winners. You also think of the private military companies which have expanded completely out of all proportion over the last 10 years, and where again, Britain is the market leader. We are the market leader when it comes to private military companies, these corporate mercenary groups which have expanded across the world and are benefiting from the spread of war. So War on Want is really thrilled to be part of a movement which is combating that, fighting against the spread of militarism, fighting against the business of war. Because there is actually one big difference between where we are now and where we were 100 years ago in the First War. The First World War was fought as the war to end all wars. Now we're in a war on terror, which is a war without any end. It's an endless war. It's a war without any enemies, because everybody is an enemy who stands up in resistance to the power of capital and its expansion across the world. And it's also a war without borders, truly a world war, because capital knows no borders in its ambitions and in its aspiration to expand to new markets across the world. And that's why I'm really, really thrilled that we're here today in a conference where we can hear from people in communities on the front lines of resistance against capital, against imperialism, and against that expansion which devastates their lives and their livelihoods. Celestine from the front lines in Nigeria, Berenice from the front lines in Colombia, Ayed from the front lines in Palestine, and also Benny in the front line in the West Papuan struggle for independence. These are crucial, important battles, and we are really proud at War on Want to stand in solidarity with them. And I hope all of those of you who've come today because you're War on Want members and supporters, you should also feel proud. Because that active solidarity, joining in the struggles and keeping that flame alive is exactly what we're about. So that's why I'm really, really thrilled to be here today. I'm really thrilled we're going to be joined by a massive group of young people, because we're going to have about 60 or 70 young people from the ages of 11 upwards who are going to be joining us today and who are going to be learning firsthand that conflict is not about glory. Conflict is not about national nobility and courage. Conflict is about horror, it's about pain, and it's about loss. But the resistance and the struggle against that is a cause for celebration. It is a cause for commemoration. I'm really thrilled to be part of that today, and I hope you have a fantastic day with us in that struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, John.